CBC News, I'm John Northcott. The Trudeau government's national security advisor says a self-styled Freedom Convoy 2.0 isn't just a possibility, it's something that officials on Parliament Hill have started preparing for. For more, let's go to the CBC's Janice McGregor in Ottawa. Janice, we've heard from all kinds of officials vowing not to let the events of last winter repeat themselves. The question is, how?
Indeed, John. The Canada Unity Group, for example, they've already begun posting about plans to make convoys to Ottawa in February, an annual event, timing their next protest to coincide with the release of Commissioner Paul Rouleau's report in February. James Bowder, the organizer of this group, who faces criminal charges for his actions last winter, isn't actually allowed to be in Ottawa as part of his bail conditions, but he's still been busy posting, saying that although they are, quote, done fighting, they want to bring their so-called bear hug back to the streets of downtown Ottawa. Now, it's unclear, really, how big a deal this sequel really is, and people have a right to protest. This isn't something officials can stop, per se, but there is a need to do a better job of keeping things under control. Last night, the Parliamentary Committee learned that a senior group of deputy ministers is meeting this week to plan how to respond if another major event takes shape. Some key decisions have yet to be made, like whether the street in front of Parliament Hill should be permanently closed to traffic. The Prime Minister's National Security Advisor, Jody Thomas, told MPs and senators that they need a legal framework so intelligence officials can properly track protests and threats to public officials on social media.
You can't just sit on Twitter and understand what's going on. You need to use tools, artificial intelligence, those kinds of things.
Free speech online is a right, but Thomas pointed out that if someone hasn't been identified as the target of a national security investigation per se, privacy rules do limit what security officials can analyze, even from otherwise public posts.
Janice McGregor in our Parliamentary Bureau. Thanks, Janice.
You're welcome.
Statistics Canada has announced the latest job numbers for the month of November. The CBC's Philip de Montigny walks us through them.
Economists were dead on this time with their estimates. Canada's economy added 10,000 jobs last month. Employment changed very little compared to October. Jobs were added in finance.
He's already in custody awaiting trial for first-degree murder. The women's bodies have not been found, but police say there is enough DNA evidence to charge Jeremy Skibicki with their deaths. As Karen Pauls reports, it's traumatizing news for a city that has long struggled with violence against Indigenous women.
They came quietly, standing outside the home of Jeremy Skibicki, where police found DNA evidence linking him to the 4 slain women, holding small candles, shining light into the darkness.
My mom was Morgan Harris, and she was a great person.
An emotional 21-year-old Cambria Harris said vigils like this shouldn't be necessary.
It needs to stop. This is a genocide happening to our Indigenous women, and I'm not going to be next. My daughter's not going to be next. Something needs to change. And now we have to grieve all over again after 9 months of searching.
Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myron, Rebecca Contois, and a 4th woman police have not yet identified.
And the search isn't done yet because we're still looking.
News of the charges was triggering for Sue Caribou.
I'm very shocked and saddened.
She's an advocate for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Her niece, Tanya Nepanak, went missing in 2011. She's never been found.
I still have hopes that my Tanya will be found. We don't know if one of those remains was hers. I mean, we're falling into deep depression, my family.
Depression and grief for those families who received the news they were dreading. Karen Pauls, CBC News, Winnipeg.
The Parliamentary Committee is zeroing in on the safety of women and girls in sport. It follows complaints from hundreds of athletes about toxic environments in their national federations. As Nicole Williams reports, they're calling for a national judicial inquiry.
I have been harmed. My friends have been harmed.
Kira McCormick says major changes to women's sports are needed. The former Vancouver Whitecaps soccer player became the whistleblower who exposed then Whitecaps and Soccer Canada coach Bob Berarda. He was recently sentenced to 2 years in prison for sexually assaulting players, including McCormick, between 1988 and 2008. Some were under the age of 18. McCormick says for years, players repeatedly asked for Berardi to be removed from the field with no success.
During this horrific decade, I struggled with depression, suicidal ideation, and felt stuck.
I've been abused. Boxer Miriam De Silva Rondo represented Canada in the 2020 Tokyo Olympic Games. She says that she competed in a toxic culture under high-performance director Danielle Trepanier and has had little support in the aftermath.
I pay my own therapy. I pay my own medication. There's no support for that. It's thousands of dollars.
The two are among hundreds of others calling for major reform in Sport Canada, beginning with a national judicial inquiry. They say abuse in women's sports continues today. And with Canada set to co-host the FIFA World Cup in 4 years, they say the sooner an inquiry can happen, the better. Nicole Williams, CBC News, Ottawa.
With 14,000 students enrolled every year, CDI College is one of Canada's largest for-profit career institutions. The CBC Marketplace investigation has found many former CDI students who say their quest for higher education came with huge letdowns. More from Travis Danrush.
My first thought was, am I going to die in my 20s?
Winnipeg's Carly Hall received life-altering news while enrolled in CDI College. She was diagnosed with cervical cancer last year and asked the college to pause her online studies to undergo treatment.
Every time I would open my laptop and start doing something, I would have a minor panic attack.
CDI College told her that wasn't possible.